the Ukrainian capital for the first time in months at rush hour on Monday, as well as dozens of other cities throughout the country.
We hope for our victory, but it's awful for the civilians who are dying. And not just for the civilians, but also for the military, for the sake of one idiot who leads Russia.
President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure as well as civilians, using some Iran-made drones.
They want panic and chaos. They want to destroy our energy system. They are hopeless. The second target is people. Such a time, such goals were specifically chosen to cause as much damage as possible.
Several cities were left without power or water supplies. The Prime Minister said 11 infrastructure facilities in 8 regions and in the capital were damaged by the strikes, spread right across the country. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the strikes came in response to what he described as terrorist action, including an attack on a bridge linking the annexed Crimean Peninsula to Russia this weekend.
By its actions, the Kyiv regime has aligned itself to international terrorist formations with extremist groups. To leave such crimes with no response is just not possible anymore.
Zelensky said he made urgent calls to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron to discuss strengthening air defense and increasing pressure on Moscow.
The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba once again described President Vladimir Putin as a terrorist today, and that these attacks on the civilian population and civilian infrastructure today prove this. Well, let's listen to an excerpt of what he told France 24.
I think that the only difference between then and now is that we can admit one thing. When Russia loses on the battlefield in a fight between soldiers and armies, it decides to terrorize civilian population and create conditions unbearable for human life. Vast majority of missiles today were targeting energy infrastructure in Ukraine with only one purpose: to deprive Ukrainians of electricity and heating in the middle of autumn and upcoming winter. So this was an attack on civilian population of Ukraine in retaliation for the success of the Ukrainian army on the battleground. This is the change. And we think that the best response to this change is to make our army stronger by providing new weapons, and make our civilians more protected by providing Ukraine with air missiles, anti-missiles, and air defense systems. I don't know what else has to happen for our partners to make all decisions related to resolving this problem.
The Ukrainian Foreign Minister speaking to France 24. Well, as France 24's Daniel Hawkins in Moscow now explains, peace seems more distant a prospect than ever before right now.
I think we've heard a lot in recent days about how we've never been so close to nuclear conflict. We've heard that from various officials, the President of the United States. I would say at this stage we've never been so far, unfortunately, from peace talks and some sort of diplomatic solution, because this is a real escalation, the biggest one since the 24th of February. And we've seen that by what the Kremlin has done, appointing General Sergei Surovikin as the commander-in-chief, effectively, of forces in Ukraine, replacing the commander before him. Both sides here are going to try to be making as much headway as they can before winter. This conflict has drawn a lot of comparisons to World War I, positional warfare, trench warfare, forces being bogged down. That's something neither side wants to do. Ukraine obviously doesn't have the capacity to launch mass strikes against Russia or probably Russian forces. So for the Russian military under the command of Sergei Surovikin will be looking to play that advantage. We are therefore likely to see more strikes. The Kremlin will be also waiting to see what the response is from Europe. The European Commission has already said we've just agreed this 8th package of sanctions against Moscow. We're going to find new ways of applying pressure to contain Moscow, to stop them from escalating this conflict. So I think over coming days, it's a matter of watch and wait for the response from NATO after their summit in Ramstein, the response of the EU. But certainly more strikes, unfortunately, something we will likely see in the coming weeks because of this change of command and because the Kremlin, just like Kiev, will want to improve its military position as much as possible before winter does set in. And it is going to be, sadly for all, a very long and likely very bloody winter.
France 24's Daniel Hawkins speaking to us there from Moscow. The UN General Assembly has just begun, just hours after Russia launched that deadly barrage of missile strikes across Ukraine. Well, the urgent UN meeting was originally called to discuss Russia's annexation of 4 partly occupied regions of Ukraine, but the debate has been overshadowed by these latest attacks. Well, ahead of today's General Assembly, the UN chief Antonio Guterres described Russia's attacks as, and I quote, an unacceptable escalation of the war. Well, let's cross to the UN in New York and speak to France 24's Jessica Le Mazurier. Jessica, it seems those attacks today in Ukraine have been very much they're going to be very much the focus of attention. Just tell us what's happening now.
That's quite right. They'll be on everyone's minds there in the General Assembly Hall as member states meet to listen to states one after the other talk about the situation in Ukraine at the moment. They are going to be examining this draft resolution, which is very similar to the resolution that was put to the UN Security Council on September 30th. It describes Russia's annexation or attempted annexation of parts of Ukraine as illegal. It calls this attempt, these referenda, so-called illegal referenda, and says that the United Nations will not accept that annexation, that it won't be recognized, that it goes against the UN Charter. It also calls for Russia to withdraw its troops from Ukraine. But there is one crucial way in which it differs from that previous resolution that was put to the Security Council and that was, of course, vetoed by Russia. And it calls for dialogue and diplomacy to be promoted in order to find a peaceful resolution in Ukraine. And that language is crucial because the West is putting forth this resolution. And what the West really wants to achieve, those Western powers, they want the entirety, or almost the entirety, of the United Nations to condemn Russia. They want to show how isolated Russia is on the world stage. And there were some concerns from non-aligned countries that perhaps putting forward such a resolution in the General Assembly would not help move the situation towards a diplomatic solution to the war in Ukraine. And so adding that dialogue might help some of them support a resolution that they otherwise would not have supported. But really, this debate in the General Assembly is going to last over days, and we won't actually have a proper vote, any results that we don't expect until Wednesday. I must also point out that Russia tried to make this vote a secret one. Perhaps Russia worried there about what the outcome might be.
Yeah, just tell us a bit more about this resolution and just where we go to from there.
Well, first of all, we've got, I think, a lineup of some 67 states that are going to actually take the podium and speak during this emergency session of the General Assembly. So we'll be listening to what all those different world powers are going to be saying, and then there'll be the vote, which we won't have the outcome, we don't believe, until Wednesday. Now, it is not a binding resolution as it would have been in the Security Council, but there's no veto either in the General Assembly, so it's much harder for this to be blocked. It has to get 2/3 support, which it seems pretty likely it will get. And really, what the West is hoping for is that it's going to be able to show how isolated Russia is. Now, you might say this is a non-binding resolution, just showing how isolated Russia is. How does that really help the situation? Well, it does help because it could be used to move towards a diplomatic solution to the war and to encourage diplomacy and dialogue, which is, of course, what the United Nations was created for. And also because the war in Ukraine, it's terrible for the Ukrainian people, and there's a lot of concern about it, but there's also global concern about its impact on the rest of the world. And so it really is extremely important to uphold the values of the United Nations and the reasons for which this organization was created in the first place, and show that member states are going to stand up and say, no, it's not okay for one member state to invade another and violate its sovereignty. There's also this other concern here at the UN that if Russia gets away with this and if it's not held to account, then other countries could follow suit and do the same thing and try to invade their neighbors.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that update from the UN in New York. Jessica Le Mazurier, thank you.